record. Okay, there we
It
go.
is being recorded.
Yeah, so I thought I would record this talk that we put together and maybe later we can turn it into a something that we put up on YouTube or um, we'll see. Um,
I think a
but
graphic novel would be good.
that would
Yeah.
be good too. Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, we put together some research that Wayne has done, that also Didia has done, and that I also did. And we have some interesting stuff to show you that's probably never been seen before. Some newspaper archives and some photos. So let's get started. Um, So let me just make this full screen if I can.
By the way, we're trying to put a lot of information into a very limited time format here, and we didn't have a lot of time to practice this, so give us a little leeway here. This might be a
Yeah,
little uneven, and then Cary put together these slides, which is sort of going to lead the discussion, and we'll just kind of follow along, see how it goes. And
yeah, and if you Wayne, if Wayne or Didia wants to jump in at any point, and if anyone has questions along the way, please put them in the chat and we'll try to get to them at the end.
let me just
No,
tell you all why I was interested in doing a book on Moore, along with Cary a few years ago, and the two of us put together about a 2-foot stack of materials on Moore. But unfortunately, we found we probably only have about 20% of the requisite materials to do a book on him. So,
Well, I don't
uh,
know, Wayne, because when I was putting together this presentation, there was just so much. I felt
yeah,
like there was so much that I felt like it probably could fit in a book, but
yeah,
we'll see. Um, anyway, go ahead.
big holes.
Yeah, there's a lot of mysteries still remaining about his work and the technical aspects of how he was able to do this. So Wayne's
I guess
gonna
I should
get into that.
I guess I should just add, I also started doing a lot of research on Daniel McFarlan Moore a few years ago and independently collected my own 1.5 foot stack high or more of materials. So we ended up duplicating one another's work, but then talking together in wonderfully engaged conversations about the brilliance of Moore and what he unleashed into our world. And that's what we want to share with you today.
Thanks, Didia. So maybe Wayne can tell us just a bit about who was Daniel McFarlan Moore.
Sure. Yeah. Well, Moore was a little bit younger than his two contemporaries in the lighting world, people you know very well, Thomas Edison, and certainly the man behind the Tesla um, coils himself. Um, and he went to work after graduating with an engineering degree, for Edison in Edison's workshop, and he took his engineering degree as one of the few engineers who was actually uh, educated in Edison's workshop at the time. And as a young guy, he had a lead to get a job there immediately after school. One of his classmates was already working for Edison. And so he got an interview and was asked, how soon can you start? And Moreland took off his coat and put it on the back of the chair and said, right now. Moore grew up the son of a minister in a household that believed in basically nonstop work and scholarship. So he came to Edison with very good work skills. We had a strong interest in science, particularly electrical science. He graduated from Lehigh University, and you have to excuse me, I'm suffering from allergies today. But he spent a number of years. His first job was as a draftsman, so he was intimately involved with a lot of Edison's projects because he had to be brought up to speed and all the technical details because he was doing the drawings for everything. And one of the things I think he also experienced in Edison's workshop, something I actually have been looking into today, he probably learned a great deal about glass blowing in Edison's shop. One of the few places probably he could have gone to learn glass blowing, and this was important to his later career. I see Cary's got up on the screen right now his early life. You can see he was son of a Presbyterian minister. He did read an article, was brought home, I think, by one of his parents about Edison, and that inspired him to essentially dive deeply in anything electrical, even though he was basically trained as a mechanical engineer. I researched at Lehigh trying to find any reference to him or his work or anything else, and apparently all Moore's stuff was given to a fraternity of all things, and like any given fraternity, was promptly lost to history. Excuse me. Anyway, not long after Moore was working with Edison, he got the idea he would like to try to make a light that was less hot, less small, and less red. And he actually told this to Edison. And in his first few years at Edison, he made quite an impression with not only Edison, but a lot of people that were in and around Edison, people of wealth and power. And so Moore was able to get three gentlemen to fund him to go off on his own and start researching his own forms of lighting. And let's see, yes, here we are now.
Yeah. If I might just go back to one of the earlier slides, I can show you. This is the steps he walked up to the front of Edison's first manufacturing company, and he was offered a job.
And that's on Fifth
day.
Avenue in New York City, by the way.
And these are some of his early drawings. And soon he became the head of the drafting department. So, like Wayne was saying, he was right in the middle of all of this early development. And yeah, there was a interesting anecdote here.
Yes, this is part of Moore's getting out into the world and meeting people. He joined a number of clubs and organizations, professional organizations throughout his career. And one of the earliest is this electrical club. And you probably are all familiar with Hiram Maxim and his early machine gun. And I think, Cary, you probably put in that little bubble there.
Yeah, just thought it was a funny anecdote that just you can imagine they're just meeting in this old building and this guy just brings a machine gun. He's like, "Hey, guys, look at this." But that was what happened in 1892. So yeah, while he was still working for Edison, he was mm, already making some new um, innovations, which he started to patent.
Right.
And he was the youngest member admitted to the American Institute of, that should say, Electrical Engineers.
One of the big ones you see there, May of 1892, is electrical steering gear that was remotely operated. Um, and that was a real first.
And so he published a lot of writings, and this was one of the most important ones in 1894. It was called The Light of the Future. I can actually send you all a PDF of this. But so he had this vision for a new kind of light, which he felt certain he would soon be able to produce, that was very different from what was available at the time. They basically only had a carbon filament lamp, which gave a yellowish light, and then there was the arc lamp, which gave a bluish light. But his light, Moore's lamp, would be a white light, just like daylight. And this was something completely unheard of at the time. And these are some.
Cary, would you like to jump to your last slides to show people what a Moore light looks like, just in case people have
Yes.
never seen it? So this is some experimentation that Cary and I did in my shop just to show you what a Moore light looks like. He primarily used carbon dioxide or nitrogen. And by comparison, I also made a lamp it was also white using krypton. And you can see carbon dioxide and nitrogen far outshine krypton. And it's a little hard to tell in the slides, but carbon dioxide white is kind of a bluish white, very attractive white. And the nitrogen white has a little touch of red to it. So these are 32 feet long. And those of you who make neon, I had a heck of a time getting these things to light at 32 feet long. And so it's truly amazing. And one of my long list of things we don't know about Moore's work is how he got a 275-foot lamp to light. But thought you'd like to see these.
Yeah. And some of Moore's tubes were just filled with rarefied air.
Right.
Is that right?
Yes.
But his method of lighting them was, well, he had something called a breather valve, which we'll get to in a little bit.
Right. And he
Um,
also had electrical devices that he obviously, to light a lamp 275 feet long, he needed to generate some fairly high voltages. Um, and he did that by, and I probably should let one of our engineers, like, I don't know if Jeff's on here or Daniel, talk about why Moore pursued a vibrator or a switch, driving it to faster and faster speeds. And those of you who know something of electrical engineering know that the faster the speed you can chop up current flow, the higher the voltages you can get. And so for a time, he was pursuing switchers in air. He found he was very limited because of the air. And eventually he built them into a vacuum tube, which we have some slides that Dydia brought back from the Smithsonian showing some of it, the remaining pieces of his work. Eventually, he went to very line 60 hertz AC current. But here's one of the vacuum rotators here. It's an absolute marvel of engineering. I can't point out everything to you, but you see a number of solenoid coils and secondary coils, and there's something switching inside the vacuum tube, and without air, it can switch without arcing, and there's no friction. Back then, they didn't talk about cycles per second, but cycles per minute, and that particular switcher would cycle in something around 1 million cycles per minute, which if you do the math, it's about 40 kilohertz.
yeah. So this exact rotator, I believe, was used for this installation. in 1898, um, or something very similar to it. So this was an electrical show at the Madison Square Garden in New York, and Moore had exhibited there 2 years previous, when he first showed his daylight tubes, and he had a pretty small room, I think, in that first show. It was maybe 12 feet by 12 feet, and um, a number of people could come in at a time. But when he returned in the second electrical show, he actually built an entire chapel that was lighted only with his gas discharge tubes, and um, it's it's pretty incredible. So these tubes were about 2 inches in diameter, and they were curved in the shape of the chapel ceiling. This is
And
what
we
it
have
looked
no
like from the
idea how they did
outside.
that. Those of you who bend neon know how fairly difficult it is to do. Imagine a 2-inch diameter soft glass tube, 8 feet long, and have to fit them to these arches. Truly a spectacular piece of glass blowing.
And we don't really know where he got the glass either. That
No,
part is just not in any records we could find.
I just talked to the former head librarian from Corning Library, and they have no idea where the glass came from.
Yeah, it may be that in his work for Edison, he had some contacts, but we just don't know. So, a fun fact is that someone was actually married in the in the Moore Chapel, and there was a sign made from vacuum tube letters over the door that said the Moore Vacuum Tube Chapel. And so this was the most popular exhibit at the electrical show. It received thousands of visitors, and Moore wanted to have some interactive uh, demonstrations there too. So this is from a great series of articles called 30 Years in the Darkroom, which we can also send to everybody, which was published in a magazine called Radio News in the 19
20s.
mid 1920s, so almost exactly 100 years ago. And so it describes what Moore set up next to the chapel. It says there was a simple bell um, outfit consisting of a push button. I'm not really sure what he's trying to describe there, but it says then follows an electric motor which starts so suddenly as to frighten the innocent visitor into wondering what he or she has done. Next comes a front door nameplate in vacuum tube letters, then electric fishing, poaching eggs by electricity, tube lighting by induction, and finally, the visitor is handed a pretty souvenir in the shape of a miniature vacuum tube, and he also receives a slight shock. So that was the vacuum tube chapel. But this shows the rotator, so that that photo that Didia provided, I think that's exactly what's going on here.
It sure appears that way.
Yeah. And so a little bit, it describes a little bit of it. It says, yeah, there was this polished oak cabinet that it was contained in, and um,
Now, one
the
thing technically for those of you who are interested, this is back during the time when there was, you probably heard of the War of the Currents between Edison and Westinghouse. Quite honestly, probably that Edison was proposing DC electric mains. And probably the DC ran into this device, which switched it at fairly high speed to produce its own their own form of AC at fairly high frequency. That's a guess on my part, but I think it's probably a pretty good guess.
Also, just to think about it, this was the 1890s, and there Moore's original devices didn't operate on street current because in most places there really wasn't street current. The plug it into the wall that we now take for granted. So the larger buildings like the Palmer House, which is the Palmer House Hilton now in Chicago, had a power generating plant in its basement, and that generated power for the Palmer House, and they then sold electricity to the buildings, next door nearby. So Moore custom designed his installations depending on where they went. But the early ones were, in the 1890s, they were still very experimental. It wasn't really until the turn of the 20th century that he was able to really sell installations that could operate on street current.
Yeah. So that I just wanted to show you this photo. This was a couple of years before the Moore Chapel, but this this was one of his first public demonstrations of the tubes at the American Institute of Electrical Engineers. And so I think what he did was he set up in the basement of that building. Yeah, so it's kind of hard to see in this old photograph, but it says he installed a high frequency alternator in the basement of the building. So yeah, I think that's what you were just describing, Dydia.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And there are a lot of technical papers written around this time about this showing, and reviews by the various engineers. Some of the most famous electrical engineers of their time weighed in on it.
Mm-hmm.
By the way,
one of the things you have to be careful with when you read Moore's works or any electrical engineering or any works about electricity in the 1890s is they use words that we think we know, but they use those same words with entirely different meanings. So because this was such a new field that the meanings of things had not really sedimented yet. So in part, when you're studying 19th century electrical innovations, you have to learn a whole new vocabulary.
Yeah.
This
you
lamp here should be familiar to a lot of people, because similar to what we do today, this is a low pressure lamp, but the ends of the tubes are painted with a paint containing a lot of aluminum to make them conductive. So basically, just like we do today, these are capacitively coupled lamps. And you'll see some drawings somewhere further on in talk where about a mile of New York City was lit by 3.5-inch diameter tubes with, here it is right here, 8 feet long, chained together with some sort of electric simulation. We don't know exactly what it is, but it looks like they're capacitively coupled. And personally, I can't imagine a 3.5-inch diameter tube producing a lot of light, but I guess compared to what they had during those times, it's better than nothing.
Yeah. So in this little drawing here, it looks like the same kind of ends that were maybe coated with the
Aluminum paint.
aluminum paint. And somehow they're attached together, and I'm not exactly sure how. But this was a plan for installing an entire block of Moore tubes in Harlem, New York. And the plan was that there would be also tubes inside the trolley cars that would be moving back and forth on the street. And it said that Moore's plan was where there's no trolley in the street is to run the line of tubes on poles placed at curbstones, and the current would be derived from the street mains.
By the way, some questions you might want to ask yourself. These are 3.5-inch diameter soda lime glass tubes. how in the world did he work those? And how did he get away with working the ends and not annealing them and putting them out in the weather and elements and whatnot? It's truly amazing. I found no references to any glassworking equipment anywhere that would be able to work tubes like that.
And yet he did write about situations where he was making installations, at curbside in front of a business or on, to install it on the front wall, or they were installed and built in place. So he doesn't describe how he pulled that off, but it's mind-boggling to think about.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
by the turn of the 20th century, he was selling more tube displays like this one, which is the front of Theodore Marceau's Tony Fifth Avenue painting and portrait studio. And what's really important is that the Moore tubing in the vestibule rendered the paintings and portraits in actual color, true color, like daylight, not false color like the incandescent lamps of the time. So this is the first lighting display that he sold in 1903.
And as you
Yeah.
read the first paragraph up there, Cary, you can talk more about how they had to
Yeah. So
show
this is
the
from 30 Years in the Darkroom. It describes that Moore and an assistant carried a large duplex Geisler mercury pump weighing about 50 pounds from Newark, New Jersey to the curbstone in New York, where the tube was successfully exhausted during a bad snowstorm.
and by
And
the
so
way, most
that's
of
a
that
long
50,
way to carry, to just carry
especially
a vacuum
that
pump.
50 pounds, probably 45 of it was mercury. So
And the very
not
next
easy.
day, well, it says his experience that night proved to him that such a pump was not practical. And the next day, he made the first rotary high vacuum oil pump. So it's, yeah, you can just imagine they were completely shaping and installing these on site and also pumping them on site. Now, as Didia was saying about the artwork, so the accurate color was also really useful in the textile industry. So here's here's an installation that was placed over the ribbon counter of Snyder's department store in Newark, New Jersey, and this allowed people to be able to accurately see the colors of the silks and the textiles for the first time. And he also produced these kind of smaller, more portable daylight windows, he called them. And those were also used for color matching textiles, and also some of the most prominent photographers of the day used them in their
And by
studio.
the way, in that photo, it looks like those are fluorescent coated tubes, but that's actually the white discharge you're seeing in the photo.
Yeah, that's clear glass, right?
Clear glass, right? That's probably a carbon dioxide tube.
And there's another ceiling installation. So it wasn't only in the United States. When he was starting to get this commercial success, he was also doing installations abroad. So these are tubes in the Central London Railway.
This is probably the most spectacular, in my opinion, um, installation. Literally, he wraps around one floor, goes up the stairs, and wraps around another floor. And these tubes lasted right up till World War II, when they're eventually replaced.
And unfortunately, none of us have been able to find actual photographs of that installation.
Except those, yeah.
So this was another anecdote from 30 Years in the Darkroom. Um, they had the great idea of installing more tubes at a circus with a giraffe there. That wasn't a good idea um, because the giraffe took a bite of the tube and caused an explosion. And also, they thought it would be a good idea to install more tubes in an underwater aquarium with sharks, and that also didn't go very well.
Do you want to?
So this was something I found in old newspaper archives. And so I thought this was interesting because it describes at the New York post office, there were more tubes in 1910 illuminating the New York post office. And this uh, this electrician who worked for Moore's company was accidentally electrocuted while he was working up on the ceiling. Let me actually show you first because we didn't actually, yeah, sorry if we're jumping around, but we didn't actually show you the how these long tube installations actually worked. So this we talked about the vibrator system, but in a span of maybe 5 years or something, he had improved that. And so that was no longer the setup. Um, there was this high potential transformer housed in a steel box. And so you would have the two electrodes hidden in the box, and then the long tube coming out, which could be any length up to 200 feet. And
By the way, if you want to go back there for a second, Carrie,
yeah,
you see there's another coil, whoops, there that's controlling a valve to allow refill gas into the tubes. It's essentially monitoring the primary current. As it changes, Moore created these beautiful, intricately made valves. They were called breather valves. Every now and then, about once every minute, would push a little puff of gas into the tube because carbon dioxide and nitrogen are used up very, very quickly. So that's what that thing is sort of down below there.
so here you see the tubes coming out the top of the box. And so this is what that valve looked like. It
Right.
was very complex.
And they're making their own gas right in that little tube on the left there. They've got hydrochloric acid and they have, I guess it's, let's see, calcium carbonate, which in acid breaks down and produces CO2. And they had another method for producing nitrogen by taking air and passing it through phosphorus and taking the oxygen out and leaving nitrogen. So they had basically little chemical factories built into their tubes, and they would last for like 5,000 hours.
So these were the state of the art for him after the turn of the 20th century. That went on from, the probably by 1905 until about 1912.
Hmm. And so now that you've seen the steel box installation, you can probably picture better what this article I found is talking about. So in the New York Post Office, was um, there was a young electrician named James McAllister, and it describes how he was hanging from this box and unable to let go because he had touched a live wire, and with his other hand, he had touched the box, and he was just hanging there from the ceiling. And apparently, a doctor happened to work at the post office and was able to save his life
Using
using um, a dose of strychnine three times the
strychnine. Yep.
strychnine three
Yep.
times the normal and 15 times the normal dose of spirits of ammonia. So I found this little explanation here, and yeah, strychnine was a poison basically, and at the time they thought that was a good idea for treating shock. So yeah, that was quite a dramatic story. Now, the probably the newspapers exaggerated a bit, um, but still. So I think maybe we can talk a little bit about what Moore ended up where his work went after the Moore tubes, because the Moore tubes had a relatively short um, heyday, I guess. They continued being used in the silk manufacturing and for the color matching, but I think 1 year after the commercial success of the Moore tube, the what was it? A new form of lighting came out that kind of was much more convenient for people to use. And
Well, in 1912, in the Edison labs, they developed the tungsten filament, and Moore knew that was coming. And so once, that was a light bulb that was not as hot and not as red, and was basically more felt that that was going to be sufficient, and that was going to be the end of the profitability of his more complicated system. And so he then sold his patent, licensed his patents to Edison, and he closed down his business and became head of the Moore lamp division at Edison, and spent the rest of his career there, constantly developing new ideas. And the one of the chief areas that he was pushing innovation all the time was in using the noble gases, because he had been waiting for the noble gases to be discovered when he was making more tubing, because the breather valve was a cumbersome system. Even though it's small and brilliant, it still had to be there. So here are some of the things that he developed, in his work with noble gases and at Edison in his later career.
we can mention the neon indicator light, these little lights that are still around today, which Moore invented after neon became available. I don't know if you want to explain
And
any
there
more
there
about that.
was a lot of different types of those. Like figure two, I believe, was a common type maybe 50 years ago, and a bunch of these, but they've all essentially died away. Not much left except that little indicator lamp.
Yeah. And another thing that he invented was basically the same neon hand torch that most neon vendors still use
It's
today.
exactly what is used today. Plus, there, if anybody's interested, check his patents. There's a lot of fixtures for doing joining and bending of glass, and a lot of the stuff he used to make his tubes. Um, he had quite a few patents.
Yeah. And so until his retirement, he was the consulting research engineer for General Electric. So that's Edison's company, right?
Right.
Yeah. And so this article was from 1935, and he was speaking to students. He was still very active inventing and patenting. And he was also very interested in the developing technology of television and radio. And he was kind of a like an idealist. He had this kind of lifelong um uh what's the word I'm looking for? Well, he believed that the development of television and radio would be the key to world peace, and this was one of his major motivations, I think. Um,
It's that was true about his um, luminous tubing as well. He really believed that with his luminous tubing, the homes of poor people could be lit just as well as the homes of rich people, which was, of course, not the case in the late 19th century. So he really believed that this kind of lighting could lead to a kind of equity that was very on a very, very far distant horizon. And he never let go of those kinds of hopes and beliefs and efforts for the future.
yeah, he was really ahead of his time in so many ways.
I have to believe he had a big part in the development of fluorescent lighting too, because he was the expert in tubular lighting, and it was being developed during those times. He worked for GE. They were one of the big additions was inert gas and phosphorus, both of which were under investigation. So I've not read anything about that, but seems probable.
And they used originally the term fluorescent was used for different things. So it's if you read the early articles, it's really confusing, but I agree with you, Wayne.
Okay.
I think almost certainly he was involved in that.
Yeah, so I guess we can talk now about Moore's death. So in 1935, he was only in his 60s, so he wasn't old at all. And his death was definitely a shock, and it made headlines all around the world at the time. So, yeah, he was murdered by a, well,
A rival inventor.
a rival inventor.
Hmm.
This is a picture of his daughter who was living with him at the time, and um, sorry, what was that? Oh, okay. I think someone's mic was on. Um, so his daughter was living with him at the time, and she witnessed this man trying to come to their house, I think the night before, and she was able to identify this man whose name was Gebhardt.
And
And
you, Cary, you found a little interesting nugget about him, possibly too.
yeah, which I'll show you in a second. So I don't know if you know, Wayne or Didia, more about what his motivations for this murder were, because this
No,
article, it just says he had a bitter quarrel with Moore 3 years ago, and we're not really sure why he felt the need to murder him.
I've never read anything about it.
Yeah.
No, I think the quarrel was one-sided. I don't think Moore thought it was a big deal at all.
Yeah.
And it's clear that Gebhardt had significant problems with mental illness.
Yeah, so this was something interesting that I found in a 1932 newspaper. And so this was 4 years before Moore was murdered, and um, it mentions his name, Philip Gebhardt. I'm not sure if there were multiple Philip Gebhardts, but since this is in New Jersey, it's probably him. And it says that he saved the life of a child who was drowning. So just an interesting, odd bit of history that this man who murdered Daniel McFarlan Moore, I guess, also saved a child's life. Um, so yeah, we wonder what was his motivation for this murder and um, what a great loss for the world of this inventor who was killed before his time.
He was shot at point blank range in the back of the head as he moved from his house to his garage. So it was particularly brutal.
Yeah, it was right in his own front lawn.
Does anybody have any questions? I know we jumped around a little bit and whatever, but
Let me check the chat because I think there may be some questions there.
Was there any community?
Uh,
I'll try again. Was there any communication between Tesla and Moore?
um, that's a pretty cool effect.
yeah.
Oh, no.
Yeah.
Yes. So at the time, I think we skipped over one of the very first slides, but there are many newspaper headlines that show how the three of them, Moore, Tesla, and Edison, were really rivals, and they were definitely in contact at some points.
It
They,
sounded like they may have been friendly rivals in a way.
I think so. And, Tesla and Edison were senior to Moore. So initially they looked upon him as like, young upstart. And then, he, went in his own direction.
yeah, Moore was, well, this article says, um, it talks about his rather loose talk of being able to make and sell sticks of daylight. So he was kind of seen as, a younger, less established inventor, and he really proved that he had something with this invention when he um, started publicly showing it.
Somebody wrote in wanting to know the pressure of the CO2. I did a lot of testing, and it appears to me that if I'm correct, the tubes ran about 100 microns in pressure, plus or minus about 30 to 40 microns. If you went lower, much lower than that, they would sputter like crazy. And if you went much higher, the resistance went up significantly. So he had to build that control mechanism he had to run around 100 microns to get it to work successfully.
Someone asks, Wayne, what torr did you fill the tubes at?
That's it.
Oh,
About
okay.
100 microns.
100 microns. Okay.
Right.
Was Moore involved in the Chicago World's Exposition? That was a big lighting thing at the time, and you talked about a connection to Chicago.
I'm not aware of any involvement. That was, 1893 was when he wrote his first article that was very speculative about his tubing, and he hadn't produced anything that was functional yet. So, it just, was the Chicago World's Fair was just a little bit too early.
His first one, I think, was in Boston in Mechanics Hall, and I don't recall the year, but I think that was his first showing.
hmm Um, in the comments, Robert mentions that the glass plumbers were probably not unlike those who installed lab drains. That's an interesting point.
Well, maybe lab drains at the time. Of course, lab drains eventually came to use fittings to take pre-made pieces. And this is actually blown glass on a
Yeah.
huge
And I'm sure
scale.
you're right that some shapes were made in advance. But
We
there
we
seems to have
used
been
to
some glass blowing done on site.
we used to have laboratory drains that were made out of glass and had fittings, and there were torches to weld those fittings together. And that was due to having people in the lab running chemicals down the drain, and they wanted something non-reactive. And so it's not a big leap to have done that. And the torch that he developed, to aid in putting those fittings together dovetails nicely with that. And his use in his papers of the term glass plumbers also dovetails nicely with that. So it's probably
Great
not a
points.
big leap.
No, great points, Robert.
Harry pointed out she noticed that in this image of the streetcars, they use the word phosphorus for
Phosphorescence. Yeah.
phosphorescene.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Well, I have a feeling from my reading, a lot of these journalists, they're not schooled in a lot of the science, and a lot of these terms a little fluid.
Yeah, like I think one of those articles claims they were filled with hydrogen, which couldn't
Right.
have been possible.
Right.
So, yeah, it's not always accurate reporting, but I think there's a lot of information out there. If people took more time to go through these old newspapers, which I just think is so fun to do, but it does take a lot of time to find these. But
Angelina
Moore
has
himself
a
wrote a lot about his own work.
Moore published a great deal in engineering journals of the period, and later in the 1920s, when he was in retirement or near his retirement, he published a lot looking back at the work that he had done. Angelina has a question. Did George Claude fill more tubes for the Paris Motor Show? Was Moore involved in that installation? So yes and no. The Paris Moore Electrique, so Moore Tube Company in Paris had the contract for the Paris Motor Show in 1910. It was for many months. I don't recall if it was the entire year, but Georges Claude approached them and asked if he could refill the Moore tubes that were lighting the Grand Palais, if he could refill those with neon for 1 month at the end of the expo. And they agreed, so he did. So yes, in the month of December 1910, there was neon in Moore tubes installed by Georges Claude, but Daniel McFarlan Moore wasn't personally involved in that agreement or in that in communicating with Claude about that at all. Those two did not get along with each other at all. And Georges Claude refused to sell any neon to Daniel McFarlan Moore, and Daniel McFarlan Moore thought that Georges Claude was basically a phony and a faker.
And as you've told us, he was a pretty nasty individual, Claude.
Georges Claude became a strong advocate of Hitler and that his French compatriots should side with Hitler in the coming war and then in World War II. For that, he was sentenced to life in prison.
But wasn't he let out because of his value as an inventor after a short time?
The French, he was let out as French. The French, at least at that time, did not keep the elderly imprisoned. So he was let out, even though it was a life sentence. He was let out at the end of his life. He died after having squandered all the millions that he made on his neon patent. George Claude had spent his career trying to make money from nothing, literally trying to make money from the elements of thin air, oxygen, neon, all the other air gases. And his air gas business, right, is Air Liquide, is still extant. But he invested a lot in trying to extract gold from seawater. And that was a business that never took off.
Never knew that.
I think he tried to harness tidal energy too at one point.
Yeah, also.
Could you talk a bit about why Moore seems to be overlooked in neon scholarship and the attention sort of often goes to Claude?
Well,
Yeah,
Claude's people worked
Dydia.
very hard to make it so. So, so Claude's people worked very hard to promote his work and to promote things that were not true about his work. It didn't help that Daniel McFarlan Moore retired and then was murdered. So that he, no longer had a voice in the discussion. That didn't help. But Claude's companies in the United States were masters of disinformation and were master manipulators. They would send moles into other people's neon shops to spy on their techniques. They used a lot of really dark techniques in their businesses, and those are the kinds of things that Claude had, fostered.
And honestly, all the biggies like Edison, Tesla, Claude, they're all big self-promoters, but it sounds like everything you read about Moore, he was kind of a quiet, unassuming guy. It was very idealistic and big pillar of the church and whatnot, but he was not a big self-promoter.
Yeah, I think he wasn't like a showman the same way Tesla was, but he did have to do a lot of public demonstrations. But that was more because um, the three guys who were funding him kept demanding that he show his progress, like weekly, and they didn't really understand all the time that it took to develop these things. But just to keep his funding, I think he had to go and do demonstrations and these electrical shows and all of this. But so we didn't really talk about his tube bending, but this was one of the first um, bent tube, um, vacuum tube signs. And Moore did make these, which Didia,
No, Moore did
oh
not make
no,
those.
okay,
That's the
sorry.
National Bureau of Standards made those. Those are still extant in the Smithsonian Institution, but they were not made by Moore.
Okay, thanks
They're
for
completely
clarifying.
separate. They're from the same period.
And this one, these were photos
The
from
same. They're the same.
the same.
They're the
Okay.
same. They're all the same.
And by the way, for those of you who make neon, you cannot remove these from their mountings because they've glass blown right through the wood. So there's no way to actually remove them without breaking the tube open.
Great point.
And Moore did patent these other kind of signs that weren't made from bent tubing, but it was more like a stencil of the words that there was just a one single tube behind it, I think.
Like a fluorescent. Yeah.
Yeah, but he did make some signs like this. The Moore vacuum tube chapel was a vacuum tube sign.
Cary, tell everybody about us contacting his heirs. That was kind of interesting.
Yeah, so when Wayne and I were uh, thinking about researching for a possible book. This was back in 2020, actually. I can't believe it was that long ago. But we tracked down some of Moore's descendants, and we actually spoke on the phone to two of his grandchildren. Um, I believe one lives in Maine and one lives in, I think, Connecticut.
Connecticut.
Um, so that was pretty interesting. And but they actually didn't know that much about Daniel McFarlan Moore. They're not, this is not their field. And so much of his, uh, personal belongings and papers and all of that seems to have been lost.
Wasn't there an electric piano that he invented that was still somewhere
Yes, I think so. And one of
in
these guys
Connecticut?
said he still has Moore's wallet. Um, but yeah, if further research is going to be done, there may be some people out there who know more about Moore. Um, I guess his Moore's daughter, who's the would have been the mother of these people we talked to. She may have had a diary or, some kind of papers, and some other family member may know about that. But we didn't really ever follow up with that. But yeah, his descendants seem like really nice people, and I'm sure if any further research is done, they'd probably want to know about it.
Yeah,
Yeah, we told them more
his,
than
his daughter was unmarried at the time of his murder. So,
right.
he never knew his grandchildren and they never knew him. So there's, a little bit of a gap there necessarily.
Yeah, and he had three children. One
Hmm.
um, one died young, I
One
think,
died young.
in a
Yes,
in
one
a
died
plane
young before
crash.
him. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, but yeah, there are quite a lot of descendants. Um, Also great grandchildren. Um, so yeah, there's really so much that we couldn't fit into this talk, um, but
Yeah, if anybody ever wants to get together and have a big enough place and build a 275-foot tube, I'm game. I think it would be great to see if we could make one of these things light.
yeah,
Wayne for the
Presentation. Oh, Daniel.
Wayne for the 100 micron tubes that you made that were 30 some odd feet long, what voltage was needed to strike those?
The biggest I had was 15,000 volts, and it just barely did it.
Thank you.
Apparently, from what I read, Moore used a 17,000 volt, but that's not a big leap, in voltage. That's when he was running it off the AC mains later on.
and as far as we know, there are just no more of these long tubes that exist anymore, right?
Right?
Um, yeah, Didia has photos of the ceiling of one of the buildings where there used to be a Moore tube installation, and you can still see the fixtures on the ceiling where they used to hang, but nothing is remaining of the glass or of the uh, the box of that powered everything.
Sadly.
Yeah, but we don't know a lot about the European installations, and there may be more information out there. And I'd love to find out about that sometime.
By the way, he also patented dozens of designs of other types of lamps that were kind of glow discharge of, something would have to be made to see what they actually look like. It never really became that commercial, but anybody's interested in building things, so they might be interesting to see what these things actually look like when they were actually pumped and filled.
So I think we're a little over an hour, so we should probably wrap up our talk. But yeah, thanks everyone.
If anybody has questions after the fact, send us questions. Very
Yeah.
interested in the topic. Love to share the information, whatever we've got.
Yeah, and if anyone has any ideas for topics for future meetings, um, it's totally open to anyone who either wants to present something or wants to work with me to put something together. Just let me know. Um, I know there was some talk about maybe doing something about William Crookes and that part of the history. It won't be for next month, but something that we may uh, think about doing. But I'm thinking we'll try to have a May meeting. I'm not sure about June because then there's the gas conference
Did you
happening
tell
in June.
everybody about the video, the news?
Yeah, so
Hmm.
if you were at the last meeting, you saw the video that I put together for gas for the film festival, and then um, you may have heard a rumor that they were not accepting it, that they had rejected it. Um, if you didn't hear, so after that meeting, after our last meeting, I got a notification from the Film Freeway website. That was where we had to submit the video, and it said it was not accepted. And I was pretty surprised and disappointed. And we tried to figure out what had happened, and it turns out it was actually a mistake. Um, and it is accepted. They there was a problem with the the Film Freeway website, like automatically uh I don't know, something happened where they extended the deadline for deciding about this, and the Film Freeway automatically gave rejections to people when that shouldn't have happened. So, good news, it is going to be in the film festival in June. And also, they say it's going to be shown in October at Refract Seattle.
Great.
And also early next year online. So, yeah.
Somebody asked Cary if you could post a link to it. Those who weren't here last month.
Yes, I was. Um, I'm going to. I'll send people a link. Yeah. Um, I
Unless you want
also
to.
I also submitted it to there's a place in Brussels called the Argos Center for Audio Visual Arts. And in August they're having an exhibition of different arts films. I don't know if they haven't decided about that yet, but that was when I thought Gas had rejected it. So I thought I would look for alternative venues. So if that also pans out, I will let people know. But it sounds like we have a few different options now. So that's great. And let's see, was there anything else? So
Can
possible
I
next.
pipe in? Oh, sorry. Can
Oh,
I
go ahead,
just pipe
Derry.
in? I've got a video that's being produced at the moment of the work that I've produced for my practice-led PhD. And although I've got a placeholder video at the moment, we've done some filming of the final exhibition. And when that's all been edited together, maybe I'd be brave enough to to show it to you all.
Yeah, that
But,
would be amazing.
Yeah. Maybe a bit more fake science in there than real science.
Yeah, I'm sure everyone would love to see that.
So just Cary, looking up May 4th will be the first Monday of May. Is that
Yeah,
where
I'm
you?
thinking maybe the second week of May, so the 11th.
Okay.
And I'll send an invite later, and topics are to be decided. So if anyone has something, just let me know, send me an email or something. Otherwise, it can just be a general chat, but um, always great to have some topics or if anyone wants to share something. So I think we'll wrap it up for tonight. But thanks, everyone, and hope to see you next time.
All right. Thanks, Cary.
Okay,
Thank you.
Bye.
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 Thanks. Thank everybody. Enjoyed the meeting.
Thanks, Pat.
Thank you for a fantastic presentation. It was really, really wonderful.
Thank you. Glad you
Yeah, that
enjoyed
was
it.
brilliant. Really brilliant. Thank you. Have a good